I've got to say, I am very, very jealous that you've not just had one Perlisten system in, but you've had both of them now.
I have.
Lucky thing.
So yeah, I've got 2 reviews for you, starting with the Perlisten R series. So the R series is R for reference. It's the second tier range in Perlisten's range. The the top one being the S series, the signature series, which was the one I reviewed previously, and I reviewed the sort of top end floor standards and the system based around that. And for this review, I was reviewing the top end of the R series as well. So the system comprised the R7T floor standing towers, the R5C center, and the R4B stand mounts, which are very capable main channels in their own right, really, and they were being used as surrounds, and a pair of their R212 dual 12-inch push-pull subwoofers. So it was a beast of a system, and
that must have been fun to unbox.
It took some time to unbox. Fortunately, I had help unboxing it, but yeah, it took some time. Fortunately, they took the boxes away with them during the review, which is not always the case, and I'm glad of it, because
you see, I find that
boxes would have filled my house.
Blessing, Doug, because it means that I am completely beholden to the manufacturer to then take it off.
Oh yes, I was, yes, but I wasn't too hot or about having the system in my living room for an extended period of time. So yeah, obviously I tested the S series, and the big question really is going to be, do you get much more for your money with the S series? And let's not beat about the bush here. This is a very high-end system in its own right. The S series was north of 40 grand, I think, for the system I had on test, whereas this is 26,000. So it's not small beer we're talking about here. It's still a very, very high-end system.
I feel a lot better about submitting a £12,500 DAC for review in this time phase as well. Actually, I'm still looking like the voice of reason and economy, so that's good.
So I mean, there are some key technical differences between the S series and the R series, and the main one really is the S series uses fancier diaphragm materials for their speakers. So they have thin ply carbon diaphragm woofers, which are these checkered space age materials that they use on their woofers, and they use beryllium for their tweeters, whereas the R series uses a more sort of down-to-earth pulp formulation for their woofers and silk dome tweeters. And so in theory, the sort of differences that sort of higher end engineering in the S series should control resonances ever so slightly better and yield a slightly smoother overall frequency response, as well as increased power handling, which it does do. But in terms of translating into a smoother frequency response, I mean, have a look at the charts for the R series. They're in the review, and Perlisten have them on their website. We're talking incredibly smooth speakers here, incredibly flat. So I'm not really convinced that the S series really gets you any significant audible difference really in terms of controlling resonances. In terms of the overall performance of the system, it was absolutely fantastic, absolutely superb. As I said, the big question is, how does it compare to the S series? And I don't think I could reliably say which is better without them both in front of me in the living room, testing them sort of back to back. From memory, with that caveat out the way, from memory, I would say maybe the S series had a slightly more refined mid-range, and had a slightly more open sound. But I mean, really, I think they probably sound more or less identical to one another. The S series gets you higher power handling and slightly fancier cabinets, but in terms of sound quality, the R series gets you to the point where I suspect the differences are only going to become apparent under very close back-to-back scrutiny. and sort of beyond this price, I would say that sort of diminishing returns are going to kick in very, very aggressively. And so that sort of brings you to the point where I'd say the R series are just exceptionally competent speakers in their own right and really don't need to be compared to the S series. And really, the S series is for people who have money to burn or who are really, not too fussed in paying a good amount, several thousands of pounds, for that sort of extra marginal bit of improvement. So yeah, I really would say that the R series for almost everyone is just going to be the better buy.
Doug, there'll be lots of people out there who haven't been fortunate enough to hear these systems. So maybe for a little bit of context for people, what kind of sound are you talking about? What kind of sound characteristic does Perlisten give you?
So they, as I say, the frequency response is incredibly smooth, and what that sort of translates to is they just sound very natural. And one does recognize speakers that are sort of tonally neutral, they're quite obvious. Everything just sounds as it should. And you definitely get that with the Perlisten. The other thing that you get both with the S series and the R series is their fancy waveguide arrangement, which does an incredible job of controlling the directivity of the speaker, which is essentially the way sound propagates around the speaker's cabinet. And the effect of that is that the off-axis sound corresponds very closely to the on-axis sound. And what that achieves is when the sound then bounces off the walls and the ceiling, the rest of your room, and then sort of meets again with the on-axis sound at the listening position, is it creates a larger sound stage, because the reflected sound and the on-axis sound are temporally consistent, so you get this sense of space. So you really get that with both the S series and the R series. You get this incredibly wide sound stage that just is incredibly natural and neutral sounding, and there are endless reserves of power. I mean, I didn't get anywhere near the R series limits, and less so the S series. I mean, my ears would most certainly give in before the speakers did. So you're cruising at reference levels for these. The subwoofers are worth a bit of a mention. As I said, they're a dual push-pull arrangement, which is similar. People will be familiar with that from M&K's design. They use the same design, and essentially what that arrangement does is one driver fires internally into the cabinet and the other fires externally, and they are wired out of phase with one another. And essentially what that does is it controls distortion. And so these are among the cleanest measuring subwoofers you'll find. You have that both in the S series subs and the R series subs. They are just incredibly clean subwoofers. You may find subwoofers that output more at this price point. I mean, you can certainly find subwoofers that output more at this price point, but you'll be hard pressed to find cleaner subwoofers that measure with lower distortion. They really are sort of subwoofer engineering to the nth degree. Whether or not, and I said this in my review, whether or not that engineering translates to an audible benefit is something I'm slightly skeptical of. I think with subs, and certainly the lower bass frequencies, your ear's ability to resolve distortion sort of falls off a cliff in lower bass. You can hear it much more readily at sort of the frequency range of voices, because your ear's naturally very attuned to that. But you can't hear distortion very readily at bass frequencies. So you're paying a lot of money. These are $5,500 each. So it's 11 grand's worth of subwoofer in the system. You're paying a lot of money for that extra engineering to reduce distortion which I'm not confident you would actually be able to really hear.
But this is symptomatic. Let's say symptomatic is the wrong word, because that suggests it's a bad thing. It is an inevitable point of all high-end anything. This is not limited to audio. That essentially you are, manufacturers and designers are compelled to produce engineering solutions that, you're absolutely right. The nature of what is likely to be perceived as a benefit under any of those circumstances is going to be very limited. I'm always reminded one of the very limited edition Porsche versions from a couple of years ago had titanium valve springs, and when one Porsche engineer got a bit drunk at a press he just acknowledged that it had absolutely no tangible benefit to the performance, reliability, or integrity of the engine. It's simply that if you're spending that much money on a racing car for the road, you just want it to know that it's filled with top quality stuff. And I imagine it's not going to be detrimental to the performance of the item. As you say, it's then commands a significant price premium, but it quietens down the mental sort of anguish of, I paid a lot of money for this box. Is it the best box I can possibly own?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true, and that's true of the subwoofers further up the Perlisten range. Is they really are refined to the point where distortion is no one does subwoofers as well in terms of lower distortion, as far as I'm aware. But as you're saying, you're buying that knowledge that it's engineering refinement, rather than that it's going to translate into audible benefit. And that's why I said in the review, they are fantastic subs and they do sound great, but they're also 11k for the pair. And if you're going to find a place to economize with this system, that's the play. The speakers, you're going to struggle to get speakers that are engineered as well, in my view. I mean, for the price, they are impeccably well engineered speakers, and they sound fantastic. I mean, yes, you'll find equivalent other sort of extremely well engineered speakers, but in the home theatre market, I'm not confident you will.
I think that's a really important distinction. Listening to what you're saying and looking at the review, there is engineering at work here, which is of specific and tangible benefit to the sort of work that you're doing. And I agree. I can't think of much else around the 8K point that demonstrates quite the same level of fastidious attention to detail.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really what they're going for with Perlisten. All right, they for example, Dan Romer, the designer. They're putting him front and center of their marketing. They're really making a big thing about the fact that this is engineering. This is a real craft that they're putting into these speakers, and it really does translate into superlative performance. So, what I would say with the R series really is the speakers are where it's at. The performance is exceptional. I don't think you can buy better for the price, which is why I gave it a best in class badge, which is the second for Perlisten, and the S series was the best in class in that sort of slightly higher tier bracket of performance. Whether or not the subwoofers justify 11k for the pair is something I'm skeptical about.
But as Ed said, if you want a GT3 RS and use it on the road and you can afford it, why not? You're getting that level.
It's all it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Buy more subwoofers.
Yeah.
Have 4 instead of 2. You get a better bass response.
One in each corner is the way to do it.